Hey guys, just doing a little family nostalgia here. This is a picture of my father's father, and he wrote this in 1975, and I just wanted to read a couple excerpts to you. He was talking about his grandfather, so my great-great-grandfather, and his wife, Sally Mae, settling on Pond Creek, Pike County, Kentucky. And she was born in 1824. He goes on talking about them clearing the land, 400 acres that they staked off. There was no work for them to do to make money at. There was lots of wild deer and game to kill. Bears and wild turkeys were plentiful. They hunted raccoon, mink, possum, and they killed wild hogs for food as well. They raised hogs, cattle, sheep, and horses on their farm. When they built their house, it was made of logs and the cracks were daubed with mud. The floor was dirt, but they had a good time keeping fires. They had to cook on the fireplace. Beds were made of corn and shucks and leaves. They raised everything they could to eat, and they bought salt whenever they could find any. My father, John H. May, was born on Pond Creek, Kentucky in 1856. He died in 1918. He married Sarah Jane Dotson. She was the daughter of William Riley Dotson. He was in the Civil War, 39th Regiment, Company H. Her mother was Jenny Eastep, born October 1st, 1830, and died February 25th, 1910. My grandmother was awful good to us children. She would make us greasy cakes when my grandfather would be out. She made them about the size of her hand and fried them in grease. But my grandfather was very mean to us and to her. We knew to get out of the way when he came home, and he was usually drunk when he came home. But I have fond memories of her. One thing that comes to mind about the strength of the women in that time: my Aunt Rhoda Dotson was married to old John Dotson. She was an example. While she was single and still at home, she was tanning some leather to make shoes for the family when some soldiers came. Soldiers of the Civil War would come through the countryside, stealing and robbing wherever they could. One of these men tried to take the hide from Rhoda. She was putting up such a fight that another soldier started to help take it from her, when a captain in the group told him to stay out of it. If she could whip him, she could keep it, and she did, and she was able to keep it. People used to have to hide their cows and horses in old mine banks and hollows and hide their food anywhere they could, even under the floor, when they heard that soldiers were coming through the country. Rhoda would ride an oxen from Virginia to Louisa, Kentucky to buy salt. The men and women used to plow with oxen. She was plowing a field when her sweetheart came home from the army, and she came leaping out of the field to meet him, letting the ox go. Rhoda was about 104 years and had sound mind when she died. Another thing comes to mind that I will put in here. When someone died, the neighbors would come in and sing and set up with the family for 2 nights. I can remember when my sister Naomi died. They said a sound went out of the house and seemed to go to the graveyard above the house. When they took her to bury, they sang all the way from the house to the grave. That was a custom then. My mother would card wool to make our clothes, pants, and shirts, and knit our socks. We only got 1 pair of shoes for the winter. If we wore them out, we had to stay in the house the rest of the time. We had no toilets, just hide where we could. Oh, how cold it was to go out at night. The little ones used pots in the corner of the room, but it was all love and kindness. My grandfather May was a primitive Baptist preacher, believing that if you were in the covenant, you were all right. If not, you weren't. There's more to this, obviously. Talking about collecting barrels of sap that was boiled down for sugar, hunting squirrels and minks, honey and moonshine, and get the wild bears drunk, and just all these things. But I just wanted to touch base on this because when we talk about prepping and we talk about some of the scenarios that could happen, a lot of our family ancestors that are not too many generations back, really not that long ago, they've been through this, and they've been through things much worse than what any of us really plan on being in. Just talking about the Civil War soldiers coming through and stealing food and stuff when they could, so they had to hide their things in the yards, and we do some of those things today for fear of these possibilities, and these possibilities were not that long ago. This was my grandfather who wrote this, who was talking about this. And when one of them got the cramps or sick, they would go down and get them a dose of medicine. Everybody kept a gallon of whiskey in the press for visitors. You know, I mean, it's beautiful. It just made me kind of feel a connection to this part of my family, because the things that could potentially happen that we might find ourselves in one day, I think a lot of times as preppers, we're picking up an ingrained genetic coding of memory from our ancestors. We know that our DNA, you know, tells us things like, I think a chicken of mine just fell in the creek, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. She's in the creek. Let's go see. If she went down that creek, we might have a problem. Yeah, she's all the way down there. Where's she at? Lord, I hope she's not just going down with the water. Anyway, guys, I'm going to go on and keep talking about what I was talking about here. My concern was just, it wasn't a concern, it was a connection. And I just wanted to point it out and just remind you, you know, that sometimes our grandparents and our great-grandparents and these little stories that are in the family Bibles and family albums are just not as far-fetched as sometimes we think we are. You know, I mean, it's just one of those things where you realize, well, I'm not crazy for thinking about burying something in the ground in the yard, because my grandparents and great-grandparents had to do that to keep their stuff from being stolen from Civil War soldiers. And talking about getting things like the sugar and the salt, these are all things that, gosh darn it, I wish those members of my family were still around, and I wish that when I had a chance I could have talked to them about how to do these things, what it entailed, what was the process. But I know that the drive and the energy there is driven from that part of my past that I do feel connected to. My family, I was born late in life. I was a menopause baby. And my father was the youngest of his siblings, so it was almost like I got the freedom of skipping a generation. My grandparents were the age of great-grandparents, so I was very fortunate in that respect. But now my grandfather's wife, my grandmother, Virgie Myrtle Bentley, she was a Hatfield, and I listened to a lot of stories from her about the Hatfields and how life was back then. And there's my uglies. I call them my uglies. But anyway, I don't know. I just wanted to throw it at you a little bit about my history and how it just kind of soothed my spirit to be able to say, yeah, it's not really insanity that I prepare for things that I prepare for, because if my grandma and grandpa were alive today, they would be ones to tell me that I needed to do that. I think they would approve of the things that I do. So, I don't know. I just wanted to share that.